So many people spend an inordinate amount of time and money and energy trying to measure what's going on in their business, only to get a number back and then still have no idea what to do with it because they have nothing to contrast it against. Most businesses don't actually have an overhead problem. The vast majority of firms have an issue, a fundamental issue in the delivery area of their business.
What kind of habit would you recommend that an ADHD entrepreneur starts?
For everyone listening, no matter what scale of business they're at, I think this is probably the most important thing that they could start doing.
Hello and welcome to the ADHD Skills Lab. Today we have a real treat for entrepreneurs and honestly anyone who sometimes feels like their financial spreadsheets are more confusing than clear, which is all of us really. Our guest today is Marcel, the co-founder and CEO of Parakeeto. Marcel is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, the driving force behind a platform that helps digital and creative agencies dramatically improve their profitability. Who doesn't want that? Through better pricing, forecasting, and data systems. And, I'm just going to give you a little bit of what to expect because I want to make sure you know this is going to be fun. So Marcel understands that running an agency is tough, especially for those of us who have ADHD, who find budgeting and pricing particularly overwhelming. He's guided hundreds of agencies to clarity, and he is here to share some real-world stories and a simple process that makes pricing and budgeting actually click. He will break down some actionable steps that you can take away on this call. So yeah, it's going to be a pretty fun and insightful episode with some stories. And yeah, it's a nice little entryway into this topic for those of you who might be like, I want to learn this, but it's terrifying. Okay, so welcome, Marcel.
Thank you, Skye. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and all of these wonderful listeners.
Awesome. So to start, just tell us about your journey to, co-founding Parakeeto. Like what experiences led you to do this? And how was that for you?
Yeah. Well, one of my first ever businesses was a tiny little agency, and we did virtual real estate reality tours before you could do it with your iPhone. Back when it was really like a lot of work, you had to take a bunch of pictures with a fisheye lens and turn it into a 3D image, and then turn those 3D images into a 3D model. And then we'd get paid like $400 by a realtor for 30 hours of work, and it was awful.
Wow.
So that was when I first encountered this challenge of like, just because you can sell a service doesn't mean that that service is profitable. And then when you start asking all the questions of like, well, how profitable is this service? You realize that there's actually a lot of other sub questions, and it's quite nuanced. And the simple questions that you need to answer every day running a service-based business are actually quite difficult to get to. Then I got interested in software. That's how I met Dan Martel, who I think is a sort of a mutual connection of ours.
Yeah.
And he actually gave me a call one day because he knew I was in between companies. And he said, hey, I have a friend that wants to build a product for agencies. Every agency owner I've ever spoken to in my entire life needs this. And I got on the phone with this guy. His name's Jared. He's still on the board today. And he said, look, he runs several agencies. He still does today. So I spend days a week in spreadsheets trying to answer these simple questions like, are we making money on our clients and projects? And is our team busy enough? And what if we get this project? And what if we don't? Right? And it's the stuff you're asking yourself every day. And he said, there has to be a better way to do this. And that was about 7 years ago now. And we've been on a mission to solve that problem ever since.
Nice. I love that. And so, many of our listeners, our listeners have ADHD. I have ADHD, and many of us feel overwhelmed by the financial side of our business. I definitely know I have. So why do you think entrepreneurs struggle with things like pricing and budgeting and those spreadsheets?
One of the fundamental ideas here that is really important is that this formula that I like to use for insight. That's what we're all looking for, right? When we look at data, we're looking for insight. And ultimately, insight is useful to making better decisions. That's really what this is about. It's how do I make better decisions that get me closer to where I want to be in my business? And the simple way to think about insight is it's a function of expectations contrasted to reality. And what I found is that so many people spend an inordinate amount of time and money and energy trying to measure what's going on in their business, only to get a number back and then still have no idea what to do with it because they have nothing to contrast it against.
Yeah.
And so, right. And I'm sure many of us have had this experience where it's like we go and we hire the bookkeeper and the accountant, or we get the new CFO, or we install time tracking and we run the report. And we're like, okay, great. My profitability on this project was X. And then all the questions start to come out. Well, is that good? Is that bad? Did I even calculate it in the right way? What should be included in my revenue and what shouldn't? And what exactly is my cost basis? And what is the cost per hour for a person? And how many hours do I use for that? Do I leave overhead in that or do I not? Right. And then you realize like, this is actually really complicated. And then you stop doing it because it's scary and there's more fun things to do in the business all the time. So I think that's part of it is there isn't a lot of clarity. And a lot of times people aren't solving for the expectation side first, which actually makes the more complicated and expensive part, which is measuring what's actually going on, a lot simpler and a lot more valuable to invest in.
Yeah. Which brings me to an interesting question. What are some of the expectations that we should have? Because, you'll be running this business, you'll be trying to have a profit margin, and then you'll hear, oh, Netflix didn't have a profit margin. Maybe they still don't, So like, what should we be aiming for?
Yes. Well, some of this comes down to business strategy, but I think generally speaking, you could say that most service-based businesses are cash flow businesses. They're not being built for some kind of outsized enterprise value. So you can't really look at like what a direct consumer packaged goods brand or a tech company that is going to sell for 20 times top line revenue, even if they're losing tons of money. That's not going to happen for your agency. The expectation with your agency is that you're going to have enough profit and cash flow from the very beginning to fund your own growth. You're probably not going to take on investors. And the people that buy your business will buy it for the money that it creates, not some other sort of form of enterprise value. So with that in mind, and assuming that that's your business strategy, that you just want this business to make you cash and money, then an expectation and what you should be designing really the agency to is something that can do above 25% profit on what we would call your agency gross income, or some other people will call net income, which is like the money that's actually yours that you collect from clients. So just to put that into context, if a client gives you $100,000 a month, but 80,000 of that is advertising budgets that you go and spend on Facebook ads right away. Well, that's not really a $100,000 a month client. It's a $20,000 a month client. So like after you strip out the money that was never yours, that passes through to other vendors, you want about 25% of that net income left over as profit at a minimum when you design the model of the business. And really, if you can land at above 15%, you're doing better than most firms. Good performance would be in that 25 to 35% range. And excellent performance would be in that like 35 to 45% range.
That's really interesting. Did you know, just out of interest, that Dan's on like 90% at this point?
Yeah, well, his business model is just like is mind bending. Yeah, and there's virtually no cost to deliver his service. So, but that's the thing, right? This is why SaaS companies sell for so much, and information companies, information companies typically don't have as much enterprise value because they're tied to one human being, but their gross margins are insane because there's basically no incremental cost to produce the goods. But that's not the case for our businesses. We have a lot of cost, and the thing that makes service businesses hard is we can't predict the cost necessarily. We could try, but our cost is variable, and that's what makes it a really tricky business to scale, and why the financial side and the ops side of the business becomes really important.
Yeah, no, totally. And to that point, when you're working with these, and I think a lot of, people that I have in my audience who run businesses, they are service-based businesses because, like you said, it's a great business to bootstrap. That's the kind of businesses that I've run in the past. So what are some of the biggest mistakes you see people making when it comes to pricing and budgeting?
I think the biggest thing is the vast majority of people that I speak to, when I ask them how they arrive at a price for whatever thing it is that they sell, pretty much everybody gives me the same answer, which is I try to figure out how much time it's going to take. I add some contingency, for risk, and then I multiply that by some kind of a rate. And I'm like, all right, cool. And then, sometimes it'll be like, I think about what other people are charging and I, try to figure out what the market will bear, or I ask the client what their budget is and I give them a price that I think is going to be good. And I'm like, all right, that's great. Now, and sometimes they'll also tell me about their pricing model, like, oh, I sell hours, or I do flat fees, or I do a percentage of ad spend, or, whatever their packaging is. I'm like, great, that's awesome. How do you know if the price is good? And most of the time I get a sort of a blank stare back. They're like, oh, well, my rate is about the same or a little bit better than other people. I'm like, that's great. But like, how do you know if that's setting you up for success? How do you know if that's going to be profitable? And if that's going to be profitable enough to support the rest of your business model? And most people don't know that when they sell something. Right. And so to me, that's sort of a fundamental problem, because most agencies, we've looked at hundreds of agencies over the last 7 years, I could tell you that the vast majority of them are suffering from starvation, not indigestion. Those things just happen to feel the same. And a lot of times in the financial statements they're looking at, they look the same too. And so they're always thinking like, oh, I just need a little bit more revenue. It's like, if you're doing a couple $1 million in revenue as a service-based business and you're still not profitable, that's an indigestion problem.
Yeah.
There's enough revenue there that you should be generating profit. So the first place that you would look if you had an indigestion problem is you'd look at what you're eating. And what we sometimes realize is people are setting themselves up for failure when they're selling things. They just don't know it. So we have a simple formula that we teach for identifying the minimum price that you need to charge. And the long and short is, whether you're selling a time or you're selling a flat price, the idea is to get an understanding of what will it cost you to get this done for the client. So for example, if you're selling hours, you look at like, what is the average cost of an hour of labor in our business? And you do that by taking the people that work for you, dividing their salary by the number of hours that you buy from them in the contract. If you use contractors, that's easy. You use whatever hourly rate those contractors charge you. If you're doing a lot of the work yourself, you figure out what it would cost you to hire someone else to do it, and you use that rate.
Yeah. That is a game changer. The first time I did that, I was like, wow, this is more expensive than I thought.
And that's such an important for those of you that are listening that are sort of still freelancing, or you're super freelancing, you're sort of starting to get out of doing all the work yourself. This is such an important thing because it's hard enough to hire and train and retain people and build a team, right? What you want to take off the table before you have to deal with those challenges is the problem of, I don't actually have enough money in my current pricing to hire other people. So now I need to like stop, change my pricing, replace all my clients, yada, yada, yada. And then I can start buying back my time. So like, if you could solve for this right now by just figuring out what will it cost me in the future and making sure you're pricing that in today, so it'll save you a whole set of problems that are not necessary. The other problems are hard enough already.
Hey, you listening to this podcast. If you like what we do and you want to hear more of it, there is one way to make sure that happens. Please go ahead, subscribe, and leave a 5-star review. We have been told 5-star reviews can help us to get seen by more people, which means more people are going to learn about ADHD strategies.
Just press the button. Just give us a 5-star review.
So back to the formula. The simple idea here is figure out what it's going to cost you, whether that's on an hourly basis, or if you're like, hey, I think it's going to take me 20 hours multiplied by $50 per hour. So my total cost is going to be X. Divide that amount of money by 1 minus your margin target. And your margin target should be at least 70%. So another way to think about this is divide that number by 0.3. And then if you have any pass-through expenses, like, oh, we're going to have to go hire a production company to shoot a video, or there's going to be $10,000 of ad spend on top of this, or we're going to have to pay for travel to the client's office, add that on top. So to give you a simple example here, if I have $1,000 that it's going to cost me to get this thing done, I divide that by 0.3, that's $3,333. And let's say, for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to add another $1,000 of hard costs on top of that. So what that tells me is I need to charge at minimum, $4,300 for this thing if I want to have a 70% direct margin on that thing, which should then give me enough margin to cover all of the other things that I'm going to have to spend money on to make the business healthy. And we can go through those afterwards, but that's the general rule of thumb. Another way to think about this is take whatever your cost basis is and multiply it by at least 3 and round up, and then add whatever hard costs you need on top of that. That is sort of the minimum price heuristic that most people should be using to get themselves in the ballpark. And of course, if you can charge more than that, go ahead and do it. That's great. But that's the simple way to think about it.
Yeah. And it's good as well, because I think one of the things that can happen is when people have a quiet period or something happens, there's an instant feeling of like, well, maybe I should put a discount. Maybe I should, compete on price. And this sort of way of setting it up, rather than arbitrarily looking at what your competitors are doing, is a good way to make that baseline a little bit more solid.
The other thing that it does is it sort of wakes you up to maybe the reality of, from a business strategy perspective, what you need to be doing. Because let's say, for example, you do this exercise and you're like, oh, geez, if we price that, we'd never win any work. All of our clients, all of our other competitors are like way cheaper than that. Then that's a signal to you that like maybe you need to change your business model and your
Yeah.
structure. Maybe you need to find less expensive ways to do things, get more efficient, find lower cost labor. Like that might push you into like a target costing type of exercise where you're like, oh, that's kind of a problem. Because like if you can't get those kind of margins, it's gonna suck to run your business and you probably will have cash flow and profitability problems. And on the flip side, if you do that math and you're like, oh, that's way lower than what our competitors are charging, well, that's a fun insight as well, where it's like, well, you could probably charge a lot more and have great margins, and you have an advantage.
Yeah.
You can spend more to acquire a customer, you can spend more on R&D, you can have better profit margins. Like that in and of itself can be an insight.
Yeah. And I will say, as somebody who, used to get a pit in my stomach every time I opened a spreadsheet, sometimes the insights are fun. They're not always bad.
They can be. They can be. That's my mission in the world, is to try to make math fun.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get practical here. So if you're an entrepreneur who feels lost and overwhelmed by their finances, maybe they heard that and they were like, cool, okay, now I feel, even more anxious. Like, what is the first step, the babyest, smallest step that you'd suggest they take to start regaining some control over their pricing, their budgeting?
I think pricing is probably the first place to start. It's really simple. And what that should start to do is solve like a lot of downstream problems. Now, assuming that you have wrapped your arms around that, you've started adjusting your pricing, but you're still struggling with profitability, then the next question is why? And there's really only two key reasons that most firms struggle with profitability. And the challenge is when you look at like a standard profit and loss statement that you're probably getting from your bookkeeper that is sort of doing a generic structure that works for every business that they work with, you can't really tell what the problem is. So most people, when they get the profit and loss statement, it's like, here's how much money comes in, here's all of your expenses, and then here's the profit at the bottom. And the issue with that is when all of the expenses are sort of grouped together in one category, it's always framed as OpEx or operating, costs or overhead. And so people think, oh, I have an overhead problem. So if you have an overhead problem, well, you're going to go like figure out, well, can I like cut down my software costs? Can I find a cheaper bookkeeper? Can I like, get rid of my office, right? You're thinking about overhead stuff. But the challenge with that is it's not differentiating between the two very distinct functions in your business. One, which is like, how profitable is delivery, the function of getting work done for clients, which is a precursor to then being able to pay for overhead and having a net profit. And the challenge is most businesses don't actually have an overhead problem, and that they're spending too much on their office and their accountants and their lawyers and like those kinds of things. Very few firms have that problem. The vast majority of firms have a fundamental issue in the delivery area of their business, meaning it costs them too much money to earn the revenue that clients are paying them. And there's two reasons that tends to happen. The first is that they are underutilizing their team. So they're paying for a whole bunch of time, and there's not a high enough percentage of that time that's actually spent doing things that make money for the business.
Yeah, that's a big one.
One of the punishing realities of this business, it's when you think about it this way, it might make you feel really anxious. So I apologize, but it's like the most unforgiving thing about a service-based business is if you have full-time employees that you pay a salary, their time expires in real time. It's like if you had like a fruit stand and you just like watch the fruit rot every second. And it was just like disappearing. So like anything that isn't sold, it goes bad and there's no way to go back and change that. And so utilization is really, really important, making sure you have the right amount of people for the right amount of work coming in. And if there's a lot of fluctuation to that, you might want to evaluate having more flexible labor, more contractors, freelancers that you pay on an hourly basis. Yeah. So that's reason number one. Reason number two, that's also just as common, is their average billable rate isn't as good as it needs to be. And so what I mean by that is the amount of money for every hour that their team spends doing client work that they earn is not high enough. And that's a function of either undercharging or spending more time than expected to earn the same amount of money. So just to give you an example of that, if I had a $1,000 project and it took me 5 hours to do, I would make $200 per hour. And so if I have, let's say, 1,000 hours of capacity on my team that I pay for, then that business can do 200 grand. Whereas if I do that 1,000-hour project in 10 hours, I make $100 per hour. Yeah. And therefore, my team's capacity to earn money is half of what it was before. So efficiency is just as important as pricing in this respect. Yeah. So those are really the two big levers and the two big numbers to pay attention to. And if you notice that they're lower than expected, then that helps you figure out, like, where's the problem? What do I actually need to do here?
And I will say that efficiency is such an important thing. Like, there is, I mean, you talk about this all the time when we're in business spaces, but the difference between somebody who is able to do the job, really understands what they're doing, they can do it efficiently. Maybe they charge you $2 an hour extra or something like that, versus somebody who is a little bit cheaper, but they don't know how to do the job, and you have to train them, and then they don't do it efficiently. Like, people are such, when you're doing these kinds of businesses, people are such interesting metrics.
Yeah. And you touched on something important, which is like the third. So I have this like golden triangle that I teach in some of our content. It's like the three things that move what we call delivery margin, which is like how much margin does the delivery function of your business create? And when you look at your financial statements, you want that to be at least 50% of every dollar is left over, to pay for your overhead and have profit, which is why we target 70 when we sell something. So the three things that can move that are utilization, which I just talked about, average billable rate, which I also just talked about. And then the third one is average cost per hour, which is like, what is the average cost of an hour of labor in your business? And you touched on something really important here, which is you often have this sort of dichotomy between how expensive somebody is and experienced someone is and their level of efficiency to get a task done. And one of like the key skill sets in our business is to figure out how to get someone that is less experienced to still be more efficient. And typically the mechanism, it can be done. It just takes some effort, right? The mechanisms for that are really good process, really good training, really good onboarding, using technology, building templates, building clear processes, essentially creating an environment where somebody requires less judgment in order to complete a certain outcome at a high level of quality. And therefore, if they need less judgment, they need less experience. And usually experience correlates to their cost. So that's how you sort of maybe start by doing everything yourself because you're super experienced and really good at what you do. And then over time, you find ways to get people that are far more junior than you to do the majority of the work. And in doing that, you can start to grow your revenue at a very fast rate relative to how fast your costs are growing. You create more separation over time.
Yeah, 100%. So do you have anything that you would recommend for somebody who's like, okay, I've decided I'm going to start getting serious about looking at these numbers? What kind of habit would you recommend that an ADHD entrepreneur starts?
It's a really simple feedback loop. And utilization is one thing, but I think for everyone listening, no matter what scale of business they're at, I think this is probably the most important thing that they could start doing. So we talked about insight is expectations relative to reality. So step one, figure out what you expect. And let's just really get focused on when you sell a project. Are you clear on how much money you're going to make? How much of that is actually yours after you strip out pass-through? How much time you expect that to take? And what the cost of that time is going to be? And therefore, what margin you expect to make? Just make sure that every time you sell something, that is clear. And the math is the same every time, no matter what the pricing model is. If you want to learn more about that, I have free stuff that we can put in the show notes that you can go and use, little calculators, all that fun stuff. And an extension on that, that's a really nice bonus is, especially if you're doing a lot of the work yourself, but even if you're not, write down the like 3 to 6 hats that have to get worn from when that project starts to when it ends. Right. And for most people listening, let's say you do creative services, it's like, how much time do you spend being the designer or the project manager or the strategist or the copywriter? Right. And estimate your time in that way. Right? This is what I kind of expected to take across those roles. So now you have the expectations. That's honestly the biggest thing. And that will teach you a lot. Am I setting myself up for failure from the start? There's no amount of tracking actuals that's going to fix that. So that's a big win. And then on the flip side, go and measure what it actually takes across those buckets. And then okay, I expected to spend 20 hours on this. We actually spent 25. I expected to make a 70% margin on this. We actually made 62. I expected to spend this many hours per role. And most of them were pretty accurate, but we really sort of went over on design. And now you can learn from that. That's a feedback loop that you can start to tune over time. And to the degree that you can close the gap between your expectations and reality, things should get a lot easier. It's easier to plan, gets easier to look into the future. You get more confident and you make more money. And, Dan likes to say profit solves all problems. It's a little bit reductionist, but there is some truth to that. Money can help.
100%. Money up front and profit for sure. Awesome. Yeah. And for those of you who are going, cool, but like, I don't actually I'm worried I won't focus and actually do it. We teach that. I'm not going to tell you again, but listen to this podcast. It's literally what we do. So Very, very cool. So, do you have, I guess, before we ask the final questions I ask everyone, do you have any encouragement for an entrepreneur who's like, I'm going to get, okay, I'm going to take your advice, Marcel. Any encouragement or, maybe a story about how it went well?
This really seems overwhelming to people when they first hear about it. The numbers, the metrics, etc. Especially if they've tried to get into a metric like utilization, for example, and they're like, "Oh yeah, simple. How many hours did they work, and what was their capacity?" And then you're like, "Well, what counts as an hour worked, and what counts as capacity?" And all of a sudden, you start to get really confused. The first thing I'll say is like, I've answered all of those questions, and it's free. So you don't
Awesome.
have to be anxious about it. You could just go get the answers to like how you do these things. And then the next thing is, and this is maybe a little counterintuitive, but I've seen agencies that are doing tens of millions of dollars with big
Mhm.
teams, hundreds of people that still don't have all this stuff figured out. And so, like, you don't have to be super sophisticated. You don't have to have an MBA. You don't have to have a finance degree. You don't have to spend all kinds of money on fancy finance accounting people. With just a couple of simple controls in place, you can get very, very, very far. So just know that, like, a little bit of learning here, getting an understanding of just a couple of simple concepts can give you so much more confidence and so much more clarity and give you so much more oxygen in your business, without it turning into you spending all day in spreadsheets or having to, master all of these concepts in and out.
I love that. I think that's so true. People don't realize sometimes that everyone else doesn't have it together. We're all just figuring it out.
Yeah.
So, three quick questions before we head out today. First one is quick but big. Your biggest professional achievement. What would you put down for that?
I could talk about, a lot of different things. Publishing a best-selling book this last year
Mhm.
was pretty cool.
It's a great book. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm very proud of it. But when I think about all the things that I've accomplished, with Parakeeto and with SaaS Academy and with the book, um, the thing that I'm instantly drawn to is just that I've been able to influence young and aspiring entrepreneurs that, I've met through networking events or when I go to do, sort of community engagement, or that just sort of like reach out to me or get connected to me through a friend, and I'm able to go sit down with them and encourage them to pursue something. And I think that that's the most meaningful thing to me, honestly, is like the handful of 14 to 18-year-old kids that I've been able to sit down with coffee with. And some of them have gone on to, build their first business and make their first buck. And that's either sent them down the path of entrepreneurship, or it's made them significantly more employable and really helped them better themselves. That's like actually the thing that I care about the most. And the credibility that I've gained by having some success in my business is what's enabled me to have that impact. And it's a funny thing because I'm here because other people did that for me when I was young, and I didn't
Mhm.
appreciate it. That I was asked myself at that time, I'm like, why would any of these busy, rich people spend time with me? I'm just a kid. I have nothing to offer them, and I understand it now, because
Mhm.
it is so fulfilling to have that conversation, to be able to like see the impact.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool. And on the other side, what would you say is the biggest professional failure you've had, and how did you handle that?
I would say that it was actually it isn't Parakeeto, but it was like the first 4 years of Parakeeto were really, really hard. And we just like wasted so much time and money and energy. And I could spend a lot of time talking about all the things that we did wrong and that situation. But I think the simple version was we were thinking more about what we wanted the business to do for us than we
Mm,
were about what clients needed to be
yeah.
successful and have their problem solved. Like, we were so
Mhm.
obsessed with this being a SaaS company because we wanted to be SaaS founders and we wanted to have a SaaS company and we wanted to sell it for SaaS company multiples. And it
Yeah,
was
yeah.
like that we were just ignoring all of these things that clients needed that were
Mhm.
opportunities. And when we finally sort of had a come to Jesus moment and asked ourselves, like, okay, if we just burned everything to the ground and we didn't care about those constraints, we just did whatever was necessary to build the best solution in the world, it turned our business around 100% after having been
Nice.
really stuck for a really long time. So
Yeah.
I think that was my biggest mistake, was like thinking of myself. And this is a nuanced thing, but I realized in that moment that I had spent so much time playing not to lose and trying to prove myself right about all of these assumptions that I was pitching to people, and this story that I had and this idea that I had. I wanted to prove so badly that I was right about it that I ignored the fact that what I should have been doing that whole time was trying to prove myself wrong as quickly as possible, so I could figure out what wasn't going to work, and then in some ways find what will work quicker. And that was like largely driven by insecurity for all those years, all of that stuff.
Yeah, and I think that's so common. I think we all struggle with that. Yeah. Well, if you had a life motto, it doesn't have to be the only one, but just one, what would it be?
This is actually something that I think I heard for the first time from Dan, but it really stuck with me, which was business is just capturing 10% of the value that you create in the world. And so I think that's sort of how I look at things. I just try to focus on being as helpful as possible. And it plays into this other thing that I also was influenced by him on, which is like your marketing should serve more people than your product ever does.
Yeah,
and so I think that's really how I've embodied that philosophy, is just like go out, try to be as helpful as possible, do stuff like this, just come on and like, just don't hold anything back, share whatever needs to be shared, give away all the information for free, just try to add as much value as you can to the marketplace, and trust that will come full circle and people will benefit from that, and they'll trust you, and eventually things will work out. And that has been true so far. So I guess I'll say that that's my motto.
Love that. Love that. Well, it's been so wonderful having you on, Marcel. I feel really lucky to have spoken to you today. So tell our audience, where can they find you? Where can they find the information? We'll put it in the show notes, but tell them as well.
LinkedIn is probably where I'm the most active. So if you want to chat directly, add me on LinkedIn, send me a DM. I'm always happy to chat. I think that's where we ended up connecting.
Yes, that's where I reached out. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm really in there. I'm really responding to DMs. If you want to learn more about everything that we've talked about, I put together a free course called the Agency Profit Toolkit. It's everything I wish I had when I was running my agency. Walks you through the metrics, how to calculate them, all that stuff step by step. It's at no cost to you, completely free. You can find that at parakeeto.com/toolkit. And if you're a podcast listener, then you can also tune into the Agency Profit podcast wherever you're listening to this, and we'd be happy to nerd out on agency math there.
Awesome. That's great. Well, thanks so much, everybody, and I will see you next time. Thank you for listening, everyone, and a big thank you to Adam for making us sound great, and Anastasia for making us look great. We couldn't do it without you.
And if you're looking for any of the references to the papers that we discuss, head on over to our show notes page, because I always bring the receipts.
Plus, if you want to find out more about us or any more deep diving into what we're doing, you can find us on Substack. That's where the community is. That's where we're chatting. And you can see all of the fun and exciting things that we are bringing to the table.
Thanks for being here.